Hello, everyone. Welcome to my live. Today, I want to read a chapter from a book. And I know some of you guys are going to get here and you're going to walk right out. And that's okay. I understand that completely. Um, my lives and my content is usually a mixed bag between English and Spanish and Spanglish. Today, I want to talk about my history as a Mexican American woman in the United States, being born here in this country, being seen like an outsider for so long. And this is not a woe is me. These are just facts of this country and what has happened to many of us. And what appears to be what this administration wants to do to all of us today as Mexican Americans. So there's not a lot of history written about everything that has happened to us as a community in this country, from being thrown out of our own lands, our own farms, homes, properties, being dragged and thrown across the border with no means, nowhere to land, nowhere to go, because that's not where we're from. We're right here from the West Coast because this was Mexico. And many of our people were thrown out. So, with that, I'd like to read to you the first chapter of Banished Citizens, a history of the Mexican American woman who endured repatriation. I always fuck up that word for whatever reason. It's written by Marla A. Ramirez. Okay, so with that, I want to read a little bit of the sleeve that says here. It says from 1921 to 1944, approximately 1 million ethnic Mexicans living in the United States were removed across the border to Mexico. What officials called repatriation was, in fact, banishment. 60% of those expelled were U.S. citizens, mainly working class women and children whose husbands and fathers were Mexican immigrants. Drawing on oral histories, transnational archive sources, private collections, Marla A. Ramirez illuminates the lasting effect of coerced mass removal on 3 generations of ethnic Mexicans. Hello, hi everyone. Thank you for joining me. Ramirez argues the banishment served interest on both sides of the border. The United States, the government accused ethnic Mexicans of dependence on social services in order to justify removal, hereby scapegoating them for a post-World War I and Depression era economic woes. In Mexico, meanwhile, officials welcomed returnees for their potential to bolster the workforce. In the process, Mexicans in the United States as citizens and undocumented immigrants alike were cast as official burdensome, culturally foreign, shedding particular light on the experiences of banished women. Ramirez depicts the courage and the resilience of the efforts to reclaim U.S. citizenship, return home. Nevertheless, banishment often interrupted their ability to pass on the U.S. citizenship to their children, robbed their families of generational wealth, and drastically slowed upward mobility. Today, their descendants continue to confront and resist the impact of these injustices and are breaking the silence to ensure that history is not forgotten. Hello, thank you for being here. Thank you very much, everyone. We're reading a chapter of Banished Citizens, the history of Mexican American women who endured repatriation from the United States. So, the introduction of the book is this. Sorry. On a sunny afternoon of February 26th of 2012, over sounds of music, laughter, and conversation, and the fragrance of corn tortillas and chicken mole through La Placita Olvera in Los Angeles, California, adjacent to La Placita at the LA Plaza, La Cultura y Artes ethnic Mexican family gathered to accept formal apology from California State Legislator and the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. The state, the city, the government were formally acknowledging their participation and coerced removal of Mexican Americans during the Great Depression. State officials also unveiled a commemorative plaque to mark this dark chapter in the U.S. history when 8 decades earlier, California officials had expelled hundreds and thousands of ethnic Mexicans from the state as part of a mass removal scheme to reduce the relief expenses and ease unemployment. One of these mass removal raids took place August 17th of 1931. That day, as 1,300 ethnic Mexicans converged at the Southern Pacific Railroad freight yard for the removal across the U.S.-Mexico border. More than 4,000 others, relatives, friends came to bid them farewell. Women standing alongside their children and husbands held little bundles in their hands, packed with only the essential belongings. They had to leave everything else behind on the perimeter of the crowded rail yard that day. I want to show you some pictures as we're talking about this book. I want to show you what this looked like. That's picture number 1. And this is picture number 2. These, as the cover sleeve says, were mainly women who were married to men from Mexico. They were themselves U.S. citizens. We could see this being repeated today in today's world as we are going through all of these raids with ICE detention centers, right? The crowded rail yard that day, a cordon of police and immigration officers with full bellies and guns bulging from their sides surrounded the ethnic Mexican families. U.S. citizen women and children of Mexican descent were cast as not only economical dependents of their Mexican migrant husbands or fathers, but also foreigners based on their Mexicanness. Amid anti-Mexican hysteria, U.S. authorities ignored discursive revoked Mexican Americans' U.S. citizenship. They revoked our citizenship, guys, okay? During the rushed, heavy police removals that often ranged in thousands, exclusionary immigration policies linked gender, ethnicity, class, status to ideas of moral character and economic responsibility that were grounded in the outdated curvature legal doctrine, reclassifying Mexican American women and children as Mexicans who were economically descendants of Mexican migrant husbands or fathers. U.S. officials systematically targeted them for removal to facilitate the wholesome exclusion of mixed status Mexican families in the country. What is happening today? Today we see people removing mixed status families. I went to a town hall meeting where plenty of white Americans said, how is it possible that we could be deporting families of American citizens? Well, it's been done before. Railroad companies acted as co-conspirators. They furnished special trains, coaches to transport mixed status Mexican families from Los Angeles, California to El Paso, Texas. And from there, the banished families were mainly relocated to Mexican states of Jalisco, Michoacán, Guanajuato, Aguascalientes, and Zacatecas. The exposure increased rapidly, leading to the removal between 60 to 75,000 ethnic Mexicans by early 1931. But Rex Thompson, the assistant superintendent of charities in Los Angeles, who was in charge of organizing repatriations drives, soon realized that the average indigenous Mexican, whose family generally numbered 5 or more, is hesitant about going home. I'm going to pause here to let you know something. My board of supervisor is one of these descendants. He is a descendant of a family that was repatriated during this time. And he had to fight, his family had to fight hard to be able to get their legal status back in the United States. And like this, I have met many people who were also in the same situation, who are all over the United States right now, who have had to obtain green cards because this government repatriated them in 1931 when they were American citizens. While the head of the household enlisted for repatriation might have been Mexican citizens, his wife and his children were U.S. citizens, unwilling to leave their native country. Thus, officials targeted women and children as a tactic to remove the entire mixed status ethnic Mexican families. Authorities predicted that if they removed only Mexican immigrants, head of household, they would be more likely to return to the United States to reunite with their family. Whereas if they expelled the entire family, the entire mixed status family, the return migration rates would decrease, effectively rendering the removal permanent. In addition, raids in public spaces intimidated even those ethnic Mexicans who were not enlisted for removal into leaving the United States out of fear, especially when they are destitute after having lost their jobs. For instance, February 26, 1931, 81 years before the formal apology at La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, more than 30 immigration agents, municipal detectives, and local plainclothes police officers surrounded the plaza, blockading through 400 people and pressing them to show immigration documents. 30 people were arrested after interrogations that lasted over an hour, during which immigration officers demanded that each detainee declare their name each time of residency in the United States, placed the entry, employment status out of 30 people arrested. 11 Mexicans of Chinese and or Japanese were incarcerated and faced possible deportation. Through the U.S. planned and carried out these immigration raids to scare tactics to drive our country, Mexican American women and children, along with destitute male Mexican head of households. The raid became wide-reaching dragnets that caused terror in the communities, affected anyone trapped in a raid, regardless of legal status, ethnic or racial background, or length of residence, was interrogated and could potentially be removed. So I think about this, and this could be me because I'm a U.S. citizen and my husband is an immigrant. So we are a mixed family. These organized raids, just one tool of many that U.S. government officials used to conduct mass removals of ethnic Mexicans during the Great Depression. Notably, officials modeled them after Mexican repatriations carried out in the economic recession that followed World War I. During the war, U.S. officials and employers had heavily recruited Mexican immigrants to fill labor shortages with promises of paid round-trip transportation. The economic crisis that followed, however, left many employers unable or others unwilling to cover return transportation expenses. That stranded workers requested assistance through their Mexican consulates. From 1921 to 1923, the Mexican government covered transportation across the deserts. Mexican citizens to return to their homeland. Anti-Mexican sentiment in the United States after World War II also contributed to a shift in relocation process, which began with voluntary repatriation efforts and eventually transformed into removal initiatives that targeted even those ethnic Mexicans who had been residing long term in the United States and their U.S. citizen children. A decade later, during the Great Depression, local and state federal authorities collaborated to replace similar repatriations, efforts targeting ethnic Mexicans for removal as a way to allegedly alleviate labor shortages and reduce relief expenses during this crisis. This time, however, ethnic Mexicans did not voluntarily initiate or request these relocations. Instead, these repatriations were organized through intimidation tactics. The banishment efforts during the Great Depression, which were more aggressive than those in the early 1920s, largely ignored legal status of those removed. During the 1930s, with the ethnic Mexican enlisted on relief roles for food assistance and economic crisis, they often found themselves classified as likely to become public charges. LPC. The label LPC labeled rendered immigrants deplorable under the statute of 1917 Immigration Act, but only if their presence in the country amounted to less than 3 years. A prerequisite for removal was often ignored. Other drastic strategies were implemented, including one that Los Angeles relief officials called "Starve the Mexicans Out" policy. Billed as a cure for the Depression, the choice was voluntary repatriation or get relief. Employers in Los Angeles too responded to the economic crisis during the interwar period by coordinating mass layoffs. Ethnic Mexicans who were considered to be temporary or foreign workers were terminated first. Once unemployed, they were likely to request relief assistance, which in turn led to the removal. The LPC's classification was informed by racialized class and gender stereotypes about ethnic Mexicans, and it was applied in ways that ignored U.S. citizenship and legal status. Its implementation meant that Mexican Americans, legally admitted Mexican immigrants, and unauthorized Mexican immigrants alike to register as so-called repatriation lists to relocate to Mexico. This approach to remove ethnic Mexicans shows clearly how racialized could limit the political rights and guaranteed of U.S. citizenship. The immigration rates that spanned the interwar period from 1921 to 1944, combined with denied relief and employer opportunities, led to the expulsion of approximately 1 million Mexicans, a startling 60% of whom were U.S. citizens of Mexican descent. The 2012 ceremony of La Plaza de Cultura de Artes brought return banishment U.S. citizens and their kin together for formal apologies to commemorate their experience with a remembrance plaque at the historical, noteworthy location. This book was born out of oral histories that some of the banished survivors at the ceremony and other banished people and their families generously shared with me and individuals transgenerational oral history interviews. Their life histories documented banishment experience, that the district in particular circumstances, yet collective, documented, and shared trauma and other serious prolonged consequences endured by 3 generations, and no trace of their key genealogy to Mexican racial formation in the United States. All ethnic Mexicans in the United States citizens unauthorized migrants alike were all economical scapegoats, allegedly dependent on social services and unable to assimilate. These representations thus cemented on social perceptions of Mexicans illegally in the United States justified the disposition of Mexican legal rights. And because the banishment interrupted Mexican Americans' ability to pass on their U.S. citizenship to their descendants, those children and grandchildren were robbed of transgenerational wealth, blocked by gaining upward mobility and cut off the acquiring political power in the United States. Banishment then was not simply an event of the past. Rather, it continues to affect the descendants of those removed 3 generations later, who have many cases spent lifetimes attempting to reclaim U.S. citizenship and the sense of belonging in an ongoing transgenerational process of resistance. As we will see from the lived experiences of banishment of U.S. citizenship, U.S. citizen survivors and their children and their grandchildren on both sides of the U.S. Mexico border, the displacement of banishment and U.S. citizens of Mexican descent has kept them from being able to fully belong to either country. That's right. They are descendants that have been taught to live between two worlds. In our communities, we are known as ni de aquí ni de allá. We're not from here or from there. We're not Mexican enough for the Mexicans, and we're not white enough for the white people. So we live in a limbo. Repatriation as banishment. The mass banishment of Mexican American citizens highlights a particular process in making of the racial state. Specifically, it captures a conjuncture during the United States mobilized notions of race and citizenship to define itself as a white settler nation. To access the rights and privilege guaranteed by U.S. citizenship, a person had to first prove their whiteness. Thus, U.S. citizens of Mexican descent were largely unable to access citizenship despite their legal status. Experience of banishment, women, their families across 3 generations demonstrates the limit of the racialization imposed on the U.S. citizenship. For these reasons, I do not refer to the so-called repatriation of the U.S. citizens of Mexican descent. Instead, I invoke the term banishment to characterize these events for precisely what they were: quoted, forced removal of U.S. citizens and mixed status families. Repatriation and deportation have been used interchangeably in the literature of mass expulsion of ethnic Mexicans during the Great Depression. But the distinction between them is critical. Deportation denotes an expulsion of non-citizen persons to their native country through a legal process. This category is limited to immigrants removed under formal process. Repatriation, to return of non-citizen migrants to their homeland as a voluntary process coordinated by local authorities and supported by federal government. Thus, ethnic Mexicans who were forced to leave despite their U.S. citizenship cannot be accurately understood as repatriates. Banishment, the term I use to characterize the removal of Mexican Americans, reference to the coerced, state-sanctioned expulsion of U.S. citizens. This is a hard kind of book to read, right? Because I've never read anything like this. I mean, I knew that we've been deported many times. ICE has come after us many times. This government has kicked us out many times, although these have been our lands for thousands and thousands of years. it's really hard to kind of talk about these things, right? But these are things that we have to discuss, especially within our own families, our children, our grandchildren, so that they understand. Hi, how are you? Thank you for being here, Evelyn. Um, we're reading this book. It's called Banishment. Okay. Banishment Citizens, a history of Mexican American women who endured the repatriation. Thank you for being here. I appreciate all of you. I know that some of you don't have um the bandwidth sometimes to stay and listen to these types of topics because they are kind of hard, right? So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna take a couple of pages a day and we're gonna read them and I'm gonna keep them on here so people can listen, right? So I hope that you enjoyed the little bit that I read, and we'll be back again. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day.